Welcome to Drawn Onward. I'm your host, Teresa Janzen. Today's guest is Ree Boado, and we're talking about what it's like to be mad at God when we experience loss. Hello and welcome to Drawn Onward. I'm your host, Teresa Janzen. Today, I have with me a very special guest, one of the contributing authors to the Life Repurposed anthology. This is Ree Boado. Welcome, Ree.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I have had the chance to read your chapter, and certainly I think it's really important. So just give us a little bit of the background and tell us a little bit about what is it about.
The chapter is called Finding Warmth After Winter. And it's a little bit of the story about my daughter that we unfortunately lost shortly after birth, about almost 2.5 years ago. And it's kind of the story, snippet of that story, but also the process of reconnecting with God after that, because I was pretty hurt by him. And so it's kind of about, surrender when, things happen that really deter your life and take your life in a completely different direction and not one that you want. So it's kind of reconnecting with God, I guess, is the purpose of that chapter.
Yeah, I think that really does come through clearly for anyone, whether it's a loss of a child or a different loss or any disappointment, when things just don't go the way that you feel that they should go.
Yeah.
What was it that really helped you reconnect with God after such an incredible loss like that? Because I think this was your only child, right?
Yeah. And I'm 43 now, and we were surprisingly pregnant at 40. When I was 40, and just surprised. And we were about to become foster parents to older kids. And so we were very surprised to find out we were having a baby, and then to feel like, that was honestly my first pregnancy in, at that time, 18 years. I've now been married 20 years. Our first pregnancy even. And so for it to, just surprisingly end like shortly after birth, when everything seemed completely healthy, even when she was born, everyone thought she was healthy. So it was a mysterious thing where she stopped breathing after 45 minutes. And they later did find out that her lungs were underdeveloped, was the reason. But it wasn't age related or anything like that. It was just a bizarre thing that just doesn't happen very often. It was just very strange. So of course, God, what are you doing? Why would you just suddenly get our hopes up out of nowhere for a baby? And then what could you be doing through that? And so I was very angry, and it was definitely a process of coming back to the Lord. I mean, I would say even initially, to some degree, I clung to the Lord, but I was mad at him at the same time. It was just it was a very confused relationship at that point. And I had been through some really hard things in my life before. It wasn't like the first time tragedy had struck my life. But it was especially heartbreaking, of course. And so it was a process. I think the biggest thing is that in a certain way, I'm grateful that it didn't happen when I was like 20 years old. I'm grateful that I had more of a solid relationship with the Lord. So I had seen him transform horrible things into beautiful things. I mean, I don't even know if I want to say transform, because the heart is always kind of still there, but it's like he brings beautiful things out of it, I should say. I think that's a better way to put it. So it was definitely like a process, but God was always my best friend since I was a little girl growing up in a really dysfunctional family. So he was my best friend, and he, so I was hurt because I'm like, you're my best friend, and why did you let this happen? But at the same time, I was just like, who else am I going to turn to? He's the closest thing I've got, I would say that what helped me reconnect with God was just remembering the things that he had done in the past in my life, remembering. And I mean, that's what David does all the time through the Psalms, right? He's angry and he's like ticked off and he's like letting God have it. And, my tears are my food. It's like super dramatic, intense, heart-wrenching emotion. And then he remembers God's faithfulness. And that was something even before I was pregnant like for some reason, you know how you pick a word for the year? A lot of times people do that. My word was faithfulness in 2018, that year before we had her in October. And it was like God was already trying to remind me of how he had been faithful throughout my life. I'm going to cry now already, but so it was that, I guess. He was reminding me that he has been faithful and he will continue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that you have and had at that time and continue to have a relationship with God where you could be angry and need him at the same time. And that's just the kind of God he is. He's big enough to take our anger, our pain, our hurt, our confusion, and then offer back his faithfulness, his love, his comfort even. But I can really see where you would be angry, and because it's hard. So that is a huge disappointment.
Yeah, in a way, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And yet, at the same time,
Absolutely.
I'm sure that you wouldn't trade that experience for anything. And even her brief life.
Absolutely.
Trying
Definitely.
to make sense out of things that don't make sense. How has that worked out for you?
Oh, that's a good question, because there's so many different ways of looking at it. And I think that when something really difficult hits, whenever it comes into any of our lives, something extremely difficult that can seem really senseless, like why did she need to die? And not that she needed to, but you go through and you kind of like dig up all your theology and like you have to sift through it all again and make sense of it. And it's such a like complete upheaval of everything you believe. And then it's like starting over. You kind of have to start over because, I mean, you can look at it as, okay, it was God's will. Like God, for some reason, chose to take her. And it's like, okay, so then you read script and you can find scriptures that seem to kind of make it seem that way. And you're like, well, God is sovereign over everything. And then so you're trying to make sense of that. So if he's sovereign, did he cause it or did he allow it? Like Job. And what is the, how does this work? And it's still, I can't say that I know the answer. I don't think that I exactly do. But I absolutely believe that God is sovereign over it all. I personally lean towards the way of like, not so much that God caused it, but that God knew that for some reason, something biological would go wrong with her lungs. But he was already making his plans of how he was going to use that. And so he allowed that to happen. And then, but then of course, then you have the questions of, well, why does he intervene? And why do some people get miracles that are completely astounding to doctors, right?
Right.
So that happens all the time. And so, of course, you pray with all your might and you have faith and people are praying, and that doesn't necessarily always move the hand of God. And so there's so much confusion in all of it. And I think ultimately it comes down to like a decision that even though I don't understand God, can I trust you? And am I going to trust that one day I'll understand, but in the now, I might not fully get it, but can I trust that you're still good, that you're still going to be with me? You're going to somehow walk me through this pain, and you're somehow going to bring something good out of it. Even if the pain still exists, you're going to use it. It's going to have some kind of purpose that one day, maybe I can see from a high enough vantage point that it can make sense to me. Okay, here are all the little branches of what this incident did in my life, and then therefore did in other people's lives somehow. So we can't see that at this moment. I think we're too close to it. But it's like I hold on to that hope that one day, the way God is, like far above, it's like when you're in an airplane and you're looking down, you can see the whole picture of the earth a little bit more, or a satellite, right? Even more so. So it's like, but we can't see that when we're literally in our little story, our little world. It's just really impossible to see what God could be weaving or working through our pain. It's hard. I
love that you said that at some point in time, you just have to choose to trust that he's going to, or that he is working something good. So where is that at for you right now? Now, 2 years later, you have this short story that is part of the Life Repurposed anthology, and you're working on another book that is almost finished. How else is God using, or what are you seeing?
One girl that I've known for years, I babysat her when she was younger. She's about 10 years younger than me. She said she felt like through the whole thing, she was kind of drawn back to talking to God, but really mad at God. Like, how could you let this happen to David and Ree? She was mad for us. And but it got her talking to God in a different way, I guess. And she said that during that, it was like she got this sense that he was almost like grabbing her. This is how she described, like grabbing her by the shirt and saying, you need to trust me. You need to just trust me. Like, I'm doing something here. And she said it was just like a unique experience. It pulled her back closer to God and helped her in her walk where she was kind of struggling before that. So that was, only a couple months or a few months after winter had passed. And it was just a surprise to me. I mean, I just thought, what, and already I think even in the beginning, it was interesting just to see how people were touched, or just the things that it did that seemed kind of peculiar. Like, how does God do that? Like, I don't know, but he works through really hard things. And sometimes they touch some kind of deeper place within people. And it's not like we did anything, it's just something in the story, or I don't know. I think even just seeing someone stay close to the Lord during something really hard is always, I mean, even for me, is very inspiring and helps strengthen my faith.
And one of the things I think is super powerful about an anthology like this is that when we put our stories together, we can start to see that thread of hope, of repurposing that God does through all of our lives. And the interesting thing is that this interview is part of a series of interviews that I'm doing with different authors that have contributed with the book. And you're the second author that I have interviewed. And I already am seeing that interconnectedness. And I'm excited to continue that, and to continue reading the stories in the book and seeing how God is working through all of those stories. So I think that's part of the power of being in an anthology. It's so humbling. For me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Absolutely. I feel honored. I don't even know all of the women, but I've been reading some of their bios and just feel honored to be, alongside so many just women of faith that are, have some stories to tell of God's goodness. It's just great.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, even as scripture is one testimony that we have of God's faithfulness throughout time. Of course, it's God inspired, and he gave it to us for that purpose of reminding us that he's there, that he's been faithful generations and generations and generations. And here today, we're still getting that through the sharing of our stories, that he remains faithful. And so there's 34 stories in the book. Yours is one and mine is one, and then a lot of others too. Tell us, how can we connect with you? What's your website, social media? What's the best way?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm a vocal coach by trade, so my website is actually going to pull up mostly vocal coach stuff, but my website is reeboado.com. But I just made a kind of a new page for author stuff, reeboado.com/author. So that has a little bit about, the compilation book, my bio. And then it also has some links to like an Instagram and a Facebook for my writing, and my blog as well. So I do a blog called It Is Not Well With My Soul.
Yeah.
So, those are the best ways to contact me.
I love how just open and honest that title is. It is not well with my soul. Sometimes things are not well with our soul.
Yes,
and I
absolutely.
and God's okay with that, and invites us to be honest and raw with him. And when we put on that tough front,
absolutely,
we're not fooling him.
Nope, he already knows. So
yeah.
The title, The title's kind of an interesting story, if you have a second. But the title came from actually kind of I won't go into the long story, I try to keep it short, but kind of a meltdown I was having, basically. And I was just struggling and feeling like, I needed to get away from everybody, and just kind of locked myself in the room just during some of the heavier grief. And I put on a music playlist, and one of the songs was It Is Well With My Soul. And I was just like, no, I had to skip the song. I couldn't hear it at that moment. I was just like, no, I cannot say that. It's not true for me right now. So it would just, I think and it was like shortly after that, I'm laying there, obviously just struggling and trying to like wrestle through prayer and like, God, get me through this so I can function. Like, I feel like I'm just stuck here. Like, I need to be in this room. I don't want to be around anyone, help me get through this little moment, And that was when that idea came in my head for that title, like to change the title. It was something else before that. And I thought, it's so true. How many times do so many of us feel like the truth is it's not well with our soul, but yet we all know that song. Then we know some of us maybe know the story behind the author, or the author of that song had lost 4 children, like all this stuff, actually 4 daughters. And before that, he'd lost a son. It was just horrific loss in this man's life. And then he writes this song. And, I think some of us, if we're honest, we're like, what? Who can write a song after all? Like, write a song like that? I think just everyone's in a different place. And I think sometimes we say things like that as a declaration because we want to be in that place. But then I think my goal with the whole book was just, here's really where I am. God, now what? But like, here's where I am. I'm angry at you. I'm trying to reconnect. Just throwing my whole heart out there is, help me, God, help me understand what you're doing through this. So that's kind of where that came from. But
I love that. And yet, like you said, though, too, when you look back at God's faithfulness, at least you can come to the point at somewhere and say, okay, it's not well with my soul, but it will be. And, but you have everyone.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. It will be. And especially like we were saying, when you get to that higher vantage point, when you can look back in it, that might be in the next life. That might not be in this life, for all we know, that we can 100% say it's well with my soul that my child died. Right? I mean, I don't know that I can ever fully say that. I wish she was still here and I didn't have a book. Like, I'd rather have my daughter in my arms than a book. But it's like, maybe one day, I believe that one day God's going to give me more insight and understanding, and I'll be able to look back and see all the good that he did and understand, she's with him and she's safe. And yeah, one day I'll be able to say it is well with my soul.
Right, exactly. And we can sing that one in heaven for sure. Thank you, Ree, for just being raw and sharing that. And, there are other people who have experienced loss. And I think that's why it's important that you bring this story out. And I really appreciate your openness. And thank you for sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me, Teresa.
DrawnOnwarD is more than an amazing palindrome. It's a production of TeresaJanzen.com.